This is Auteur Detour, wherein three film lovers travel through the filmographies of cinema's most important directors in hopes of finding a greater understanding on the other side.
Hello and welcome back to Auteur Detour. My name is Chris, joined as always by
Hi.
and Travis.
Hi.
Oh, keeping it sultry. This week's movie is 2016's Hail Caesar, the Coen brothers' 17th feature film. 17, guys. Wow. The fundamental plot's fairly straightforward. In the early 1950s, when renowned Hollywood actor Baird Whitlock, played by George Clooney, is kidnapped by communist screenwriters, it's up to Capitol Pictures' chief fixer Eddie Mannix, played by Josh Brolin, to get him back. But in typical Coen fashion, the movie deals less with the straightforward plot details and more about creating a vibrant world of unique personalities and hilarious, borderline unbelievable scenarios. While their more recent films like Inside Llewyn Davis, True Grit, and The Serious Man touch on more personal, philosophical, and genre-based treatments, Hail Caesar is the Coens getting back to fun again with this odd yet trippingly worded love letter to the golden age of Hollywood. The dialogue's smart and snappy, the world's bright and alive, and we get Roger freaking Deakins back, baby. With a cast that includes names like Scarlett Johansson, Channing Tatum, Ralph Fiennes, Jonah Hill, Alden Ehrenreich, Christopher Lambert, Frances McDormand, and Tilda Swinton, among many others. This is a movie that dares me to give you a straightforward plot summary. Would that it were so simple. Hail Caesar, guys. What'd you think?
That line, would that it were so simple, in my memory was the marketing for this movie. Do you guys have any memory of that? It was like,
No.
There was no straightforward trailer, or at least if there was, it came out, a couple of weeks before the movie. And I just remember a year before them releasing that scene with Alden Ehrenreich and Ray Fiennes doing the "would that it were so simple," and then like the end of that little back and forth, it cuts to him saying what he ends up saying in the movie, which is like it's complicated or something like that.
Yep.
Right.
And I was like sitting there like, I cannot fucking wait for this movie. I was so excited. I'm like, all of these actors that I knew were going to be in it were in their real peak of their movie stardom and just being really, and I was just excited. Like I was still big on Clooney at the time. I was still like, Ray Fiennes was like my guy in that moment. And then there was all these supporting guys like Scarlett Johansson and Jonah Hill and all these people that I'm like, yes, I'm like here for this. And then it came out and I was like,
You did not say, yes, I'm here for this in 2016. I think that's anachronistic. I think that's a
I was like,
remember.
I was
He
like,
did.
this looks
Maybe
exciting.
you're the first one to ever have said it.
Yeah, the drag community stole that from me. I'm just kidding. No, then it came out and I tried to like it a lot in the theater, and I did enjoy it, but I sort of quickly was like, yeah, I don't know if that was as good as I wanted it to be, and I haven't watched it again until this time we watched it again, and we can get into what that experience was like after you tell me what you think, Travis.
Okay, well, I saw the movie. I don't know if I'd seen any previews, but I was just like, it was a Coen Brothers movie in theaters. Looked like, a Coen Brothers comedy to me is like a very special thing. And I went and saw it, and I found a lot to like in it, on the big screen, the spectacle of it. The scenes with Ray Fiennes and Alden Ehrenreich, or whatever his name is, those were... I love those scenes. And sometimes the first time I see a movie, if there's like one thing I like about it, my memory will be a little skewed. Like I will be like, I love that part of that movie. Actually, the first time I saw Crazy Stupid Love, the scenes with Ryan Gosling and basically anybody he acts with were so good to me that like I built my memory of that film just became completely based around his performance. And I tried to watch it again recently. Almost unwatchable, except for Ryan Gosling, and I keep the DVD like not on my shelf, but like in a secret envelope like under my bed, so I can just like fast forward and watch the Ryan Gosling scenes only because I love like a tour de force performance. And although Alden Ehrenreich, he's not exactly like the like leading force of those scenes. You know, whenever he's on screen, the movie is like so good and so cool
Yeah.
and so comfortable.
He really pops.
But
in
I
this
I
movie,
went back
like,
to
there's
this
no
movie
question.
being like, oh yeah, this is one of the Coen Brothers like underrated ones. You know, it's light and frothy, but you know, I'm really excited to like get into the meat like underneath. And that was a mixed metaphor of kind of sickening like ramifications. But basically, I went back to this movie and I was like, oh no, this movie is exactly correctly rated. Like it.
Yeah.
No, I mean, not only does it like, I think it's one of their weakest movies, like easily, but it is one of their like, it's their messiest movie. It's their ugliest movie, maybe. It's their like. I have a lot of strong feelings about this movie, but it's very curious to me because it's not a matter of like, oh, I dislike, you know, even the Lady Killers, like that was a, like it or hate it, and obviously I think most people are not that into it, but like that is a movie of like strong authorial intent, you know. This movie to me felt like maybe something happened in the edit. Like maybe that Michael Gambon narration was like thrown in at the last minute. That narration that just kind of pops up every once in a while, says something, and then just disappears for long periods. Like this movie, I don't know what the point was. I mean, we can get into like what it was, but like
I kind of have some ideas about that. But
I think it's interesting that it's their last movie they made before kind of foregoing cinema altogether and like becoming, you know, Netflix auteurs, whatever that means. But like it really was to me very boring and bad.
Chris, what do you think?
I actually, if you could tell by my intro, I actually really liked it this time. I had a total reversal. The first time I watched it, as you remember a couple weeks ago, I'm like, I kind of begrudging the fact that we're going to have to watch Hail Caesar again. I must have watched it with the wrong... either I didn't watch it entirely or I just watched it with the wrong set of eyes because I don't know. I just thought it was great. I thought the dialogue was like a lot funnier than I remember.
Funny.
There's a lot of little nuggets that I took out of it that I didn't catch the first time. There's a lot of little stuff that they'll say and then they'll never come back to it again, you know? And I think if you're, I have the captions on when I'm watching movies often, but partly due to my hearing, but like there's a lot of little things I picked out this time. I like rewarded a second watch. And so honestly, I liked it a lot more. I hated the first time I watched it. I hated the musical numbers. I hated all the little extra stuff. I'm constantly trying to make sense of this movie. Like, where are we going? What's the central plot? What's going on? So to your point, Travis, I agree. It is easily their most messy movie. It feels like there's no like underlying message here. It's like, here's literally one day in the life of this guy, and here, check it all out. You know, it doesn't even end on like a nihilistic note, like say Burn After Reading does, where it's like none of this means anything. You know, but I think I just found myself way more engaged with it because I just let it go. I'm like, let's just see what happens. How's this movie unfolding, and then just kind of let it play as it is. And I honestly just enjoyed it a lot more than the first time I watched it.
So it's
leaps and bounds.
I think it's a tone problem mostly for me. Like it doesn't like maintain a tone throughout the different story arcs that are happening. Like I feel like the Clooney movie and the Josh Brolin movie are the two like central movies in this story, and like they couldn't be more like opposed in their sort of I don't know, in their like silliness. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I think there are some like, I mean, did you guys find the Josh Brolin character performance story arc like compelling or interesting at all? Because like every time he's on screen, basically like my eyes like kind of like start to close.
Like, interrupt
really?
you with,
and I love Josh Brolin.
I enjoyed it. No, I thought he was great.
What I loved about
movie,
it,
not in this
what
movie.
I loved about it was not what I loved about it, but what I really did like appreciate about it when I first saw it, less so this time, was that like, you know, I've told you guys, and I probably mentioned on the podcast, like for whatever stupid reason, I have this like affinity for like behind the scenes of like old Hollywood. You know what I mean? Like I love reading like Hollywood Babylon and all these like stupid like paperback biographies that came out of the time. And so I liked that it was like a fictional, but like kind of in that world thing of like, I mean, when I saw it the first time, this time I'm 100% with you, where I was just like, You know, I just liked that, like, I knew the Coen brothers loved that also. And, like, I liked that it was, you know, them sort of living in that world. But this time that I watched it, I was just like, okay, I'm just, like I said, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to give my fix for the movie right now because I feel like it'll just be easy to keep coming back to it. And it is that it should have been what Buster Scruggs was. It should have been an episodic sort of thing with Josh Brolin as like maybe a carry through to each like segment, but like complete, like make it an hour longer, but like
an hour longer. I could barely last through the hour and 40 minutes.
The reason why it was hard to last through, and because, you know, Buster Scruggs, I mean, we haven't talked about it yet, but like for me is much easier to last through, is because if I want to skip the Liam Neeson scene, I'll skip the Liam Neeson scene. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to watch the whole fucking thing in Buster Scruggs. Okay. But like, I feel like what this movie does work as is the vignettes. Like, you said that you hated the musical number, Chris.
Initially. Yeah, that's why I appreciated it more the second time around.
Scene. And I feel like
which scene?
The Busby Berkeley like ripoff, you know, the Scarlett Johansson like
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I thought that like when they are doing like a full homage, it kind of like, even if it's that or the singing cowboy like Over the Moon or whatever it's called, Lazy Old Moon, like all of those kind of scenes, I'm like, okay, they're like living in this world. It's when they're doing like the interspersed storylines and even like the George Clooney like, you know, dalliance with communism thing, like that could have worked if it was its own storyline in the middle of like a vignette movie or of a anthology movie.
I don't agree that you have to make an anthology movie to make it work. Like, there are plenty of movies that are extremely episodic, like the Coen brothers have even done them, and they still work on their own, you know what I mean, like their own basis. Like, I mean, Federico Fellini is one of my favorite directors, and he does movies where you kind of go from scene to scene, and it has this kind of amazing feel to it. And I don't think that I think that they could have done that if they had made a better movie. Like, I don't think literally none of the Josh Brolin stuff for me works. Even the sequences that they recreate of like the singing sailors, the musical number, like the water number, the Esther Williams kind of thing, I don't think any of that stuff works because you don't have the actual spectacle of like the old Hollywood style because it's all done with this CG kind of overlay and underlay. Like, this is a cheap production and it looks hokey, and you've seen even pastiches of this same stuff done before in other movies better. The only one that gets almost good to me is the Channing Tatum dance number. Because they actually they make so many clever like little things that could have been out of one of those movies where he's pulling the bottles away as the sailor's stepping on the bar, like a moment like that is almost good, and then the gay subtext kind of gets ramped up so high by the end of it that it's like, okay, that's almost good, but just make the full joke. Just like we've all seen humor about this stuff before where it's like these old sailor movies were actually gay. Like, that's to do this in 2016 and just be like, have it barely, I mean, it's farcical, but it's like barely funny. It's not beautiful enough to be like to admire it as like a pure spectacle on the level of the actual Hollywood movies. So why are we watching this? Like, it just seems so tired and unimpressive.
Thing you have to remember about those old movies though is that like even people
Please tell me about old movies. Ian,
even people our age, we had like, that's entertainment. Like, we had a way to know those movies. You know what I mean? I feel like anybody who's younger than us, like in the internet era, has almost no like jumping off point with those old classic movies. I don't know.
Do you think that this movie is for young people, Ian? Do you think this was a movie directed to the Gen Z?
Well,
or do you think they responded to it? Because I'll
tell you, they did.
I'll tell you what.
Heavily market like Jonah Hill as the star of this movie, and he has 18 seconds of screen time. Like, it's not like.
But that's just like where movies were at the time. Like, I don't think that the Coen brothers. I don't know. I don't feel like this movie struck a niche where it was like, oh wow, thanks for reminding us of the grandeur of Hollywood. Because again, like, maybe young people haven't seen That's Entertainment, but I feel like, again, like, just growing up in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s, like, throwbacks to old Hollywood exist. You know what I mean? Like, making a contrast between, like, oh, behind the scenes of Hollywood was different than, you know what I mean? I just don't understand what they were going for, like what new kind of ground they were attempting to, I don't know.
Here was my major problem with it as a whole, is that it felt like, you know, in the Inside Llewyn Davis episode, and we've talked about it like over the whole series, like, but you specifically, Travis, were talking about how they tend to not believe in authenticity in art. Like they tend to sort of like reject the idea that art is authentic in any way. You know what I mean? That like any kind of art can be authentic. And I get that. And I totally like, I when I say that I get it, I don't mean that I necessarily agree with them, but I do agree that that's what they are positing, right? But this movie is aggressively like shitting on the idea that there's any authenticity in art. Like it almost seems to hate the idea that like any part of making movies, or, you know, it's got this like biblical epic that's like at the center of the story that's trying to be made, and like they couldn't be more disgusted with like every aspect of it, you know what I mean? And then they've got the like Noel Coward, like, you know, high society drama, and they're just like, yeah, but they're just pulling like a cowboy actor and trying to like get words into, like they seem to have like.
Are they disgusted by it? Because I mean, they seem. I don't know. Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know. I think it feels like they. It's one of those things where they're kind of poking fun at something that they wish was different or was better, maybe. Like, because they do in the end love it. Obviously, they're filmmakers. They love films. They love like old films. They love old Hollywood. There's a lot of stuff that they draw on,
this
right?
movie, would you think that they love it?
Yes,
like
yes,
really...
yes, because
totally.
of the detail of the recreations, absolutely, yes.
And I think that like the way Roger Deakins films things, the way they, especially the way that some of those dance numbers are shot, it is, I don't know, I don't think of them as ugly at all. I thought it was actually a pretty good looking movie. And the first time I watched it, I thought it was like them, like a satire, like fuck Hollywood, this place sucks or whatever. And the second time I watched it, I almost thought the exact opposite. It's like they see like the problems of Hollywood and they wish they didn't exist, but let's point them out anyway, because to ignore it would be kind of foolhardy, I think.
I have to say something controversial. I think Roger Deakins is at his worst when he works with the Coen brothers. Like, there are movies, obviously, that he shot for them that look fantastic, but he's made so many bad ones with them. And, like, the CG stuff in the water number, and, like, the kind of, and the way he shoots, like, I don't know, I don't know, just the way he shoots the Roman stuff and the way he shoots the dance number just rubs me the wrong way. Like, it's not 100% authentic, but it's not, but it tries to be like kind of gesturing towards it, and it's like whatever kind of middle ground they landed in, it just is very unappealing to me.
I wonder how much of that has to do with like how they just storyboard all of their movies so much, so he's kind of in a box in that way, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I question the degree to which Roger Deakins is informed entirely by his own stylistic opinions and the opinions of others, or like the way the director wants to see it. Like House of Sand and Fog does not look at all like a Roger Deakins movie, except for like the fog part of it. You know what I mean? I'm like, this just doesn't look that great. I'm so amazed that this guy shot this film. Or like Revolutionary Road, another like, it looks pretty. There's certain Deakins-esque stuff to it, but I'm always wondering like to what degree is the cinematographer held to account by the directors, and to what degree is he just like, here, go have at it, you know? Blade Runner 2049 looks fucking amazing. I love the way that movie looks, you know? But I just don't know, you know, he's got certain stylistic elements to it, but
I think the Coens pull him back a bit from like going like from being as kind of like expressionist or as kind of like pretty as like he is with a lot of other directors.
Sure.
And sometimes I think it works great, and other times I really feel like again, it's like a compromise where like no one wins.
Yeah.
And I feel like, especially as their career has like gone on, and they've, you know what I mean, they've kind of like reined in a lot of their kind of own kind of like visual kind of like flourishes or embellishments. The look of the movies is getting like a little bit more bland to me sometimes. Not uniformly, but just like it's a trend I feel like I'm noticing in their movies. This one again, just like all the scenes with Josh Brolin, And they're over the sunlight is too bright on him, and like there's like weird ADR in this movie. Do you know what did any of you guys do research? Like, was the budget really low on this one? I know this was like
no, it has like the biggest cast like that
right.
they've
The
ever
cast
had,
is insane, but I thought maybe
sure.
like yeah.
I mean,
They got 2-for-1 tildes, so I thought maybe that saved some money.
I like Tilda
yeah.
Swinton in this movie.
I love when
they
I love when she
I
does her
love
dual
her.
roles. She brought back the dual twin sister role again, as she did in Okja. You guys saw the part.
yeah.
No, I
Bong
haven't
Joon Ho's
seen that.
Okja.
Yeah.
She's she
I
plays
gotta see
dual role
that.
in that movie too.
Oh, I gotta see that.
No,
But
she's great in this.
I don't-
They just did a
But I mean, most of the
series-
movie was shot like on a Hollywood backlot. I mean, it's not like they had to get a lot of like on location stuff for this particular movie. So to your point, that may be working in the lower budget arena there. Who knows?
I don't know.
I didn't do
know.
any research on that part, but
I did, but it was 2 weeks ago or something, so I forgot. But it was something like, I know that it did make money, so.
And honestly, I mean, I bet a lot of those actors might have even taken like a less pay. Plus, a lot of them are barely in it for maybe a full scene anyway. And at this point in their career, this is their 17th movie. Let's be in it. I don't care how much they're going to pay me. I'll get
That's
to.
what I was
I
thinking,
live in
yeah.
LA.
But don't you
I'll
think
just show up
like
at the
whole
studio and make the
Scarlett
movie.
Johansson, you talk about like actors that are only in it for a scene. Don't you think that Scarlett Johansson, like if it needs to exist in this movie at all, it could have been like you open with the Busby Berkeley like
Yeah.
scene, and then you get that stupid joke payoff where she's actually like a New York fucking whatever, and then you have like a 12-minute scene of her like having or a vignette of her like having to figure out how to adopt her own baby, which is something that happened in like old Hollywood. That was one of the things that like the
Not a good
real
scene.
Eddie Mannix did for somebody. The real Eddie Mannix was like a monster by all accounts, and like that is,
A monster or a mobster or a lobster?
a
What did you say?
monster, a monster, a
okay.
a monstrous
lobster monster?
Basically a monster too, though. Like
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And but like that seems fairly unnecessary, but like
it's so boring.
it gets to this like idea that like it's setting up Josh Brolin's character, I guess, as like a guy who's a fixer, right? Like that's kind of the only reason to have that segment in it. I'm with you. We don't need the Josh Brolin storyline.
What
That's
is
why
the
if
point of
he's,
the
like-
story? But he's the central figure, and like, why is he crying in that confessional at the beginning of the movie? Like, what is going on? Like, he seems really good in his job. At the end of the movie, he's like, and this is the one like big. I mean, besides the like completely self-indulgent film recreations, which I think are very in keeping with the Coen's filmography for them to do, like what. The only like kind of Coen theme that I could get out of it was like, and the I guess juxtaposition between like communist ideology and American ideology, the kind of the man who's just of his time and place, you know what I mean? And it's like these people being gay, women having sex, like these like very simple things that like in the near future the studio is not going to be able to kind of keep under control,
Right.
And then this whole studio system is going to kind of like collapse to a degree when audiences like demand like a more, to your point, Ian, like an authentic representation of the real world, and studios like like MGM or Capitol Pictures, as it's kind of represented in the movie, aren't going to be able to sell their wares to like a more cynical public. What was the point of the story? Because that didn't, that barely, that, I don't know, that story just had no power for me. It was just kind of like, should I keep my job or should I go? And like the contract. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just see it again as this is why I kind of changed my opinion. I think they actually love Hollywood in their own way, because in the end, he's got all this shit he has to do. He's being underpaid for it. He's like balancing and juggling all this stuff. He's being offered a better job at Lockheed for more pay, for fewer hours, less work. And in the end, like he just likes what he does because he sees like despite all the bullshit that comes with every day dealing with these Hollywood motherfuckers, that in the end, it's still like something that he enjoys doing and he feels gets meaning out of, and in the end of the day like wants to do despite all of the bullshit. So I saw that's again sort of the reason that changed my initial reading from fuck Hollywood, is what the Coens brothers are saying, to you know what, yeah, kind of fuck Hollywood, but we love it, so it's still something we want, like worth fighting for, I guess, at the end. I don't know, maybe that wasn't clear with Brolin's character as much, but that's kind of what I took out of it.
I mean, that's my rating too. It's just like to me, it's like unconvincing. It's like an it's like an unconvincing love letter. It's like a it's like a half-assed, rushed love letter with like that was like, yeah, I love you. You're the best.
What my notes say. It's just like it's like they're trying to make a love letter to Hollywood, but like they don't actually love Hollywood or something right now. Like I don't know. It's something. There was something to like, you know, in Inside Llewyn Davis, they're sort of like anger towards or like they're not anger. I haven't found the right word. They're like distrust of authenticity. Feels like it's built from like you said, Travis, like an anxiety that like, none of this is real, but I can be above it because I know that it's not real or something like that. But it's like really an anxiety that you're going to be found out kind of, you know, that's a lot of what he's doing in Inside Llewyn Davis. In this one, like, I can't think of like, you know, the only real character that gets any hero treatment or like isn't treated like complete shit is Alden Ehrenreich, basically. Like, you know, he's sort of given the like, you know, star turn in this movie. And, you know, I don't know. It just seems like everything else that's in the movie is just like, look at this fucking idiot. Like he's like, you know, he's like the head of like the big sword and sandal epic, but he's like a fucking numbskull alcoholic, you know, that's like all this stuff. And then like, look at this, like Gene Kelly, guess what? He's like a secret communist that's also not very bright. Like, it's all like, I don't know. They're just sort of shitting on everybody and like the authenticity of like any of the old movies that they love. I don't know. They really feel like they were tearing them down to me. I don't know.
Well, okay, they were inauthentic, but they did reflect. I think they also make the point that they do reflect certain realities, like the subtext, the gay subtext in those sailor movies is, you know what I mean? It like they bring that kind of to the surface, and like the idea of.
But I mean, when
the idea that Christianity, like as opposed to like a you know Marxist like system of understanding the economy, that Christianity is a thing where you will like just witness Jesus and have like an instant epiphany and have your whole beliefs changed, like again, I think that's their. I think they do make the point that these movies are dumb, but actually reflect like a reality of life that isn't just the text, but it's rather the subtext. I don't know. I don't think it's as simple as like this is dumb, this is wrong, or this is completely not real. You know what I mean? Like there is. I'm saying that I don't know. I think they make the point that there is a connection between the substance of the films and kind of the underlying stuff in American life at the time. But I was going to say, not only is Alden Ehrenreich treated really respectfully or decently, but also the woman that he takes to the premiere too. And I love, that was one moment of kind of like, where I thought they were actually making a point that was interesting, where when he says like, how do you dance with them bananas on your head? And she goes, it's easy. And she puts the bag on her head and she does a little dance, flicks it off, catches it behind her back, and you're like, oh shit, these like, you know, the stars back then were talented. You know what I mean? Like his horse tricks were insane. And I think that was like, they were also making that point of like, look at the insane talent of like this New York, whatever girl who's doing these like crazy swimming numbers and these like dancing sailor guys. Like that was one kind of, what do you call it, observation that they made that actually rang true and was like really interesting to a point to make.
That's why I feel
but almost no other time in the movie do you feel like, oh wow, you, like people drank but then acted in movies. Like I don't like, you know, how is that any different than like any other parody of like 50s Hollywood stuff that we've seen for 50, 60 years?
I couldn't help but like compare it to a movie that came out a couple of years later, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because they're both like very different movies, obviously, but they're both sort of like imagining a false Hollywood of the past, you know, and like recreating it in like, you know, laser focused detail in a lot of ways, but also farcical detail in a lot of ways. And then like sort of reimagining what it was actually like. I don't know. And like, go ahead. I see you want to interrupt me.
What about Mulholland Drive? I mean, to me, that is the movie that has a lot of similarities to this one, and down to the ending. And there was a book written called The Impossible Lynch, which was all about how David Lynch in his movies, he sets up this kind of schism between kind of like dream reality and actual reality that can't be bridged. And then he always makes it so the dream reality wins, kind of showing like a fantasy ending. Like all his movies have like happy endings that are like, wait, how did this happen? Like this is impossible. But he's kind of like showing like this is where society can't meet our needs or our desires, and then here's how it could, you know. And in this movie, the ending kind of creates like, again, in the classic Coen cycle way, like he wants to keep working at the movie studio forever, and that's where the movie ends. And it's just like he'll always be running around slapping the actors that get out of line, and it's just
and
like
the actresses, like
and the actors, actor is not a gendered term, but
True.
no, just kidding. But yeah, so I don't know. I felt like it was kind of going in that direction, but just in, again, such like kind of a half-assed kind of way that it just wasn't. It had no power to me.
There is something you guys kind of touched on that I thought was interesting, in that a lot of characters kind of are one note to a large degree, with the exception, I wish more people of the characters were more like Alden Ehrenreich's character, because he comes off initially, right, as this literally like he can't speak. He doesn't know how to say words on camera, right? And that's made very, very clear. But then all of a sudden he's called into the office, and Josh Brolin's character's like, I got this problem, got this guy's missing. He's like, check the extras. He gives you like all this very incredibly lucid
which was
insight, you know, and he gives him like, you know, and then he like actually is a major help, and he like, you know, follows the briefcase, and he ends up like tracking him down. Like this like apparently dumb
like
character actually has multiple layers to him, but he's one of the only characters that seems to do that, unfortunately. Like George Clooney is that dumb the whole movie, basically, you know. I mean, he's good when he's in front of the camera.
Well, that's
maybe
the thing. That's why I was trying to like juxtapose. Sorry to cut you off. Like the difference between like the Hollywood that they see on the camera and the Hollywood that they see behind the scenes, like, or that they're trying to recreate, where it's like everybody except for Alden Ehrenreich is treated like shit when they're like, you know, in their off-screen persona, except for, like you said, the the girl he goes out on a date with, who for some reason I'm blanking the name of who she's a parody of, basically. But
Carmen Miranda.
Carmen Miranda, thank you. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, everybody besides them are sort of treated like, you know, like ignorant fucking assholes kind of thing. And then he gets this like full James Bond, like a different kind of like fantasy where he's just like,
well, he's literally wearing the cowboy hat and like saving the day. Like he literally becomes like the cowboy hero of the 50s. And he's like, so it's commies again. You know what I mean? Like he becomes like the embodiment of that. And
I do love him in this movie. I feel like all of the rope tricks with those spaghetti rope tricks, you know, and like all that stuff works so perfectly.
So charming.
And like
spaghetti western indeed.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Well done.
But you know, I guess like, you know, it's at Capitol Pictures. I was just looking down at my notes, which is the studio that they made up in Barton Fink. So it shares a universe with that, you know, and like it also feels very Hudsucker Proxy to me in their like sort of whole city like you know, reimagining of a white Los Angeles in this case, with not a single black person out of the biggest cast that they've ever done. And it's like they do these things where they're like, I'm gonna recreate like my idealized version of New York and Hudsucker Proxy, or like my idealized version of the Hollywood studios, and they just like either omit or fucking purposely leave out like any black people, and it's so hard to like reckon with that. You know, that part of it was so fucking just gross that they just like, they're just never gonna be better about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just, the movie, Ian, I'll just go, I don't really have anything to say about that, but going back to what you were saying about how everyone's like a, you know, piece of shit fucking asshole, I think that's putting it way, way too strongly. Like, none of them seem that bad. They just seem dumb. And the movie is so farcical that you can't, you know what I mean? Like, you can't take any of it seriously.
Meant that they're treating them like that. Like, they are being
but they're not, because they're like cartoon characters. Like, you can't treat like Daffy Duck like, you piece of shit, you idiot, like, you know, like, that's a stick of dynamite, not a carrot, you moron. Like, how, like, you can't hate the characters because they're not real characters. I don't know, like, there are movies of theirs that feel like they have, like, an ill will. This one just feels like so tossed off, and, like, there's no real anger to anything. You know what I mean? It just seems like, you know, actors aren't really as smart as the characters they portray. And again, it's like, they've been doing that since Looney Tunes. Like, where is, like, the...
I don't know.
I don't know what the point of this story is.
I felt like they were fully, like, creating these, you know, if not as good, obviously, as, like, Busby Berkeley or Gene Kelly musicals, or even Lonely Old West, like the cowboy musical thing that they do. And, you know, there's a few other ones, obviously, Hail Caesar itself. They recreate these in these scenes that are, like I said, maybe not as good, but for the purposes of the movie, like a very, you know, truthful recreation of them for them, or like a pastiche of them for them. And then they're like, but look at what's really behind the scenes. You know, like that's how I felt about it.
And that's been done a million times, and better and funnier, and like
this movie
as accurate as some of their kind of, like, again, observations about, like, the acting styles of those particular movies and stuff like that, as like kind of like clever as they were, it wasn't enough to, like, hold your attention. It felt very indulgent. It was like, I hope they had fun directing this scene, because I'm not having fun watching it. Even like the wig of what's his name, Channing Tatum, when he takes his hat off and his wig is, like, unfolds, and it's, like, just so awkward and weird. I don't know.
Okay, I want to talk to Chris more, because he actually liked this movie.
Okay, I'll check. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks for coming out, Travis.
Shut up,
because it's been real.
Because it's hard for me to, like, not say, like, more about how I think it could have been better as vignettes. But Chris, like, when you enjoyed this movie the second time, like, I don't know, like, what was your favorite part? Like, what's I don't know. It's like, which parts worked for you? Because you say the Josh Brolin part didn't bother you. Did the George Clooney part bother you at all? Like,
no, in fact, we talk about George Clooney a lot, right? And I thought that this was now, like, sort of the example where George Clooney kind of gets to be like a George Clooney sort of a deal, where he's like the movie guy who, like, doesn't really care. He's just kind of, you know, he's not obviously that dumb in real life, but, like, he just gets to be like this guy. Like, that's fine. It wasn't, like, my favorite, but I actually really just enjoyed, like, Josh Brolin. I don't normally like Josh Brolin, to be perfectly honest. He's almost always kind of like a dick, kind of an ass. I like his acting. He's a good actor, don't get me wrong. Okay. But he often picks roles that are kind of agitate, like, you know, Inherent Vice. He's kind of that big pompous kind of guy. You know, he's annoying as hell in, like, Old Boy and stuff like that. You know, he's like a kind of a bigger than life kind of dude. But I just enjoyed kind of the yeah, I just enjoyed the dialogue a lot in this movie, where, you know, it's snappy and quick, and I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened there? Everything's really lined up. So I like the organization of the trajectory of his day was a little bit more fun to follow the second time around, because they refer to stuff and he actually goes and does it. You got 11 o'clock at this meeting. Oh, he's not going to tell you what it's about. And meet in the garden or whatever. Then blah, blah, blah. The twins, you know, end up accosting him or whatever. And there's all this stuff. Oh, got to call my wife. For some reason, maybe it's because I have, like, this ridiculous life that's like, okay, here's this. We literally created a 12-point to-do list right before this today. And it's like going down the line. And I feel, I honestly feel sort of like a fixer sometimes. And I'm like, I love this and I appreciate this, because they actually reference almost every single thing that the lady says he needs to do that day. And he does it, you know, including calling his wife. He even addresses the fact that he didn't call back the coach to tell him to move to outfield. And he's like, oh, he played shortstop and crushed it. Awesome. You know what I mean? There's something about that glimpse into his life that was so fleshed out and laid out and actually was systematically delivered upon that I really appreciated watching the movie. And again, normally he plays a character that I don't tend to care for as much, but here it's like, all right, I was a little bit more behind it this time than the first time I watched it. Also, just kind of getting lost in the musical numbers a little bit more, rather than like, when the fuck is this going to be over so I can see what happens next? You know, I'm like, well, nothing much is going to happen next, so I might as well kind of just see where this goes, you know? again, not their best movie, but one of the ones in which I really changed my mind about after having viewed it the second time. You know, same thing sort of happened with Inside Llewyn Davis. For me, really appreciated it a lot more. The opposite sort of happened with, again, Burn After Reading. You know, a movie you guys really like and I just don't care for. So, you know, and it's again far from perfect. There's stuff that kind of bugs me, like the fact that Channing Tatum's character is always like in character, like acting, like he's on this like submarine and like Dolph Lundgren's out there and everything too, and you're like, he's still like has that strange like play to the camera, like, you know, looking back, ooh, like the duck face, you know, Magnum blue steel coming at you. I'm like, what? Why is he doing this? Is this part of a movie? For a second, I didn't know that submarine scene like was actually part of the like the actual plot unfolding where they're like giving the money to the USSR or whatever, right. You know? I'm like, is this another Channing Tatum like musical number? And when's it going to start again? Because he's the same sort of note as opposed to like, you know, Hobie Doyle, who's kind of he's dumb, but then he switches it up and goes, like you said, James Bond mode.
Well, there's times when the movie, where like the movie world kind of seeps into the real world. Like for me, most clearly when Josh Brolin is talking to his 30-year younger wife, and she kind of gives this like perfect like housewife performance. Where she's like, well, you know best, honey. What do you think? Like, you know, and it's like very fake and weird. And I don't know. I thought that was kind of a cool moment actually, because again, the acting was so on point, and it was sort of like, you know, again, making this connection between like the real world and the movie world. But I didn't feel like that really went anywhere. But yeah, I don't know. But Chris, I love when you point out like, you know, whether a plot is like well constructed or not. I feel like your mind is always like paying attention to those details and stuff like that. So I can appreciate it from that point of view for sure. And I do like that too when a movie is like constructed well and stuff like that. So I guess I can respect it on that level.
You know, we talked a lot about Sullivan's Travels like in the first few episodes of this podcast. And I feel like, you know, it's like such a staple in their, whatever you want to call it. It's like such a arrow in their quiver that they just always are sort of like coming back to. And I feel like this movie, like, you know, the idea behind Sullivan's Travels obviously being that like, you know, there can be art in the goofy. Like it doesn't all have to be like self-serious and that kind of thing. And this has some of that too, except for I just don't trust that like, I feel like they're even taking it a step further and being like, you know, there's not art in any of it. I don't know. Like, I don't know. That's how I felt watching it. I don't know if that's the point that they were trying to make, but that was like the feeling that it left with me. Like, I think that maybe they were trying to make the point that like, it's all fucking bullshit. Like the Sullivan's Travels thing. So like, you might as well like, you know, make people laugh kind of thing, you know, and make people like have their day go by easier. Like that's sort of what Josh Brolin says, you know.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah, the narrator points to like the
know?
movies as like a balm or a salve, right?
Right.
To people suffering. And again, I don't feel like the movie really like pulls that off, but also it's a point that's been made many times, and so it's not really interesting to me. I did think it was, again, like the movie keeps pointing to like the company that he's going to possibly work for is like an arms manufacturer, right? Like that's like they're like developing the hydrogen bomb, you know, and that's like the real world. That's like the serious world. So why not go back into like the fantasy of the movies? Like I don't really get what the point of that is. And I like the I didn't love the scene where like the different the priests and stuff like that are all doing like a kind of who's on first thing about the representation of Jesus in the movie. I thought that might have worked better if it was like in the middle of the film and kind of just stopped the plot and you were like, what's going on now? But at the beginning of the movie, when barely anything has happened, to be like meet all these new characters and have them just like debating kind of like the paradox of God and as he's represented in the different religions is like unfunny and kind of boring. I don't know. It was like... Yeah.
It was unfunny to me mostly. I mean, I don't know. It was kind of boring too, this movie. Honestly.
Yes,
like, that was a big problem.
Thing.
You're wrong. You guys are wrong. God damn you guys.
Sorry.
You know, it's weird to say that it was boring because I think that you could pick any moment out of it and like show a clip of it and be like, this looks cool. Like this looks funny or interesting or something like that, you know, or like beautiful in certain moments, you know, but like, but as it's strung together, it's just doesn't work, which is why I feel like, again, like if it was a Netflix show, it would work better to me. I don't know.
I mean, I do agree that it's definitely tonally inconsistent. You know, it's not like the same pitch throughout the film, but I don't know. I think a lot more of it worked for me probably than it worked for you guys. Do you think though that maybe, I mean, at this point they're like, who cares? Like, let's just make a fucking movie and
Well,
like, let's
okay,
not
this is
have,
what I,
you know.
so,
I don't
yeah,
know.
I mean, that's the kind of vibe that I got, and like, you know, we've talked about, or I've tried to say that, like, you know, it seems to me that, you know, they make kind of more serious films and then the kind of like less serious films, but they don't make unserious films. You know what I mean? Like all of their movies, like to me, like Raising Arizona is like maybe their greatest film. And it's like the way that that is like put together, constructed, written, directed, everything is so incredible. And it's like, it works so beautifully for me. Like it sings, you know, this movie does not sing, and it like none of the sequences, even when they're trying to recreate these like some of these classic moments in movie history, and put their own stamp on it at the same time, it just doesn't work. It doesn't feel like they're really inspired. I mean, it feels like they're, I don't know what the problem is exactly, but it felt cheap. It felt unserious, tossed off. Only a couple of the performances really worked for me. I don't know, and I feel like it was a production thing, and I wonder if something happened with the studio that they were working with or in editing. Again, where did that narration come from? Why was it used when it was used? Like, I feel like Ian, you and I at least have like feel like there's an issue with like the movie as like an entertainment. But I feel like none of us have like a really good theory of like what the movie's trying to say, or like we're all just kind of like.
I think, yeah.
I keep waiting for someone to make their theory so I can say why it's wrong, but then I don't.
I think
I don't
like,
have one either.
The thing that it's trying to say maybe but fails is that like, you know, this is a dream factory, and like, you know, it's not our job to like. I mean, basically, like the thing that Josh Brolin says when he slaps Baird Whitlock at the end, or George Clooney at the end, and he's just like, you go out there and you're gonna say your lines, and like he kind of gives him like the communist manifesto in a weird way, where he's like, you just do your part and the rest like plays out, you know. He's like, even though he's doing it in argument against communism, but he's just like, you know, I think that that's sort of what they're saying, is just that like Hollywood is like a dream factory where like you put together these little pieces of, you know, whether they're fucking dumb, he's like Baird Whitlock, or like, you know, communist like Gene Kelly, like you know, what's his name, Channing Tatum or whatever, but like, or you know, Lawrence Lawrence, like the, you know, the gay director who like makes these sort of high concept dramas, and like, you know, whatever it is, you're just a cog in the machine and you put it together and it makes a dream that like the world loves, you know. Like that's kind of what I felt like they were trying to say, although I don't think that like it worked, or that even that was like clear that that's what they were trying to say. I don't know.
Yeah. To me, I don't know if it was so much like a message, but just kind of like a look at how these systems work, and like look at the way that you know, if you're in this kind of system, you like, that's your reality, and you fight to like uphold it, you know what I mean, whether it's right or wrong, and you I don't know. This movie bothered me on a deep level.
Me too. It was
just
unfortunate. I knew going into it like that I was not looking forward to watching it again, because I was like, yeah, I remember like enjoying moments of it in the theater, but I like never wanted to go back and rewatch it. And then like the second it started, I was like just checked out basically, and like thinking like, I wonder what I'm going to even talk about when we talk about this movie, because it just doesn't feel interesting enough to me to like, you know, really even want to investigate it more. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it felt like the closest to something like Intolerable Cruelty, where it was just like they weren't fully invested or something like that. And I felt that in the work. And I don't know, again, if this was like a lack of inspiration from the outset, or like something happened in the production that like made it difficult for them to like make into something great. But it felt like a troubled production to me, and I could just totally be projecting because I didn't enjoy it. But like, again, like the ADR, the lighting, the wigs, like why on a high budget movie by the Coen brothers is this?
I had the
happening?
same feeling about Michael
disappointing.
Gambon's thing where I was like, wait, who's this now? Like, what was he? I had forgotten that he was in it. And then that his narration's in it. I'm like, so clear to me that like that was written in afterward to give it even more of a pull through the movie, which Josh Brolin's character was supposed to be. But they just couldn't nail that, like, storytelling technique, which they're usually very good at, of just like having a coherent like flow even with multiple storylines going on. I don't know. They do these things where it's like super referential and like they live in these worlds, whether it's Hudsucker Proxy or like, even Intolerable Cruelty in a more failure way, of like sort of recreating with a slight Coen edge what they loved when they were kids or even now, and I'm finding like that I'm less and less interested with the movies that are more focused on that than the ones that are telling like a unique storyline that's like, original to them. I don't know.
They seem tired at this point.
I am. Yeah.
No, they seem tired.
I am tired.
They
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, this felt just like uninspired, and it just like kind of like let's recreate these movies, but not. It didn't. I don't know. I feel like I'm being repetitive. I have nothing new to say.
Pretty much. Should we rate it?
I'm excited to rank this one. Sorry.
Let's do it. What you got, Ian?
My movies start with Fargo, number 1. No Country for Old Men, Big Lebowski. Inside Llewyn Davis is still rolling in at number 4. I love that movie. Then Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, The Man Who Wasn't There, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Blood Simple, Burn After Reading, A Serious Man, True Grit. Then we get to this sort of 3 movies that I feel like are all on the same level, which are Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy, and right below that, but still on the same kind of feeling to me, is now Hail Caesar. And then Intolerable Cruelty and Lady Killers way below all of those.
Ooh, wow. Lower tier.
Sorry.
It's all good. Hey, it's you. I'm just surprised, actually, after all this time, how much I keep thinking about Blood Simple. It's like it's the top 4 for me.
Movie.
That's awesome.
I can't move it down. I keep rearranging my list. Like Barton Fink is actually moving up after having seen this one because it reminded me, and I'm like, this turns into like kind of a horror movie. This is kind of, like I just keep thinking about certain elements of it, and Blood Simple just keeps holding its own, surprisingly enough. So my rankings, again, sort of a tie between No Country and Fargo, with the edge going to No Country, as it has in the past. Number 3 is The Big Lebowski, followed by Blood Simple, Man Who Wasn't There, Raising Arizona. Then there's kind of the middle ones, Serious Man, True Grit, Barton Fink, Inside Llewyn Davis. And then kind of the lower ones, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Hail Caesar, Miller's Crossing, Hudsucker Proxy, Burn After Reading, Intolerable Cruelty, Lady Killers.
Barton Fink moved up for you, I feel like.
It did, yeah. Like I said, I keep. There's movies you just kind of come back to, even when you're not like consciously considering them. There's like something about them that thematically rings true to you.
I mean, Barton Fink is still low on my list, but I think about it every movie that I watch of theirs as like, sort of like there's a sketch in that movie that like they keep coming back to, and like pulling stuff from. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie. Mm-hmm. Okay, Raising Arizona, Fargo, No Country for Old Men, The Big Lebowski, The Man Who Wasn't There, Burn After Reading, then maybe Blood Simple. At this point, it gets a little fuzzy, but Blood Simple. Those are that top tier is pretty powerful. Then Blood Simple, and then maybe Inside Llewyn Davis, True Grit. Those could switch on any given day. I think they're both really good. Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, Hudsucker Proxy, Serious Man. Those are all kind of tied, honestly. Then it's really hard for me, but I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is better than Hail Caesar, then Intolerable Cruelty, then Lady Killers. And you know what? This movie almost made me reconsider, reappreciate Oh Brother, Where Art Thou a little bit. I think both of these movies kind of like look to the past and create like a mythical version of this American shared memory that we all have, this shared mythos. In the one movie, it was like the American South. And even though like I don't love it as a movie, that vision of that world was so vivid and so kind of beautiful, and so kind of lovingly crafted that even, you know, with George Clooney trying his best to ruin it, you got to give it props. Hail Caesar, on the other hand, is like the kind of uninspired version. It's like, oh, remember the movies, and it's just like, yeah, whatever. You know, it didn't
But I
capture
have
my.
to go back to this because
Yeah,
you kind
I
of
remember the movies.
you shit on it right away. But like, I do think that like, there's no way that 23-year-olds have had the like exposure to classic movies that we have at 39, because like, not just because. I mean, just because of the like the amount of media that they are like exposed to. Even a film buff has like so much more to choose from, and then like there's so much more that's out right now that I feel like even like a 24-year-old film buff hasn't necessarily paid the $8 to see a Busby Berkeley movie. Like, it's not easy to come by anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
I think those movies
right.
maybe are not as watched anymore, but I think they live on in like there's like Instagram accounts like Remember Hollywood, and like there's
Maybe.
Twitter, there's like there's whole like areas of like film Twitter, and it's all 22-year-olds being like the greatest directors of all time are Paul Thomas Anderson, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and they're all
Yeah.
like sharing, but there's clips like, like check out this Busby Berkeley number, or check out this like these dancers from the 30s. People are aware of that that
I even
iconography,
feel like-
even if they haven't seen the actual films.
maybe, but I even feel like it's not uncommon for you to see like something pop up where it's from like, nowthis.com or some shit. And it's just like with like different, music underneath it. It'll show some clip from a movie of the past and be like, can you believe this was made in 1934? And it's
Totally.
like, has like a little small amount of viral sort of thing about like, who knew, but it's like anybody who's like over, 45 or
sure.
something knows about it, but
Sure.
it's like, that's where that stuff lives now. And
Yeah.
you're lucky if you even see it,
That's
I
what
mean?
I'm-
So
that's
I
what I'm
don't
saying. I
think
think
that most of the world, I bet most of the people who saw this movie, or at least, a good percentage of them, this is their introduction to like the sort of grand musical, or like the, Gene Kelly style tap dance number, or
Okay.
even, like,
You
I
may
don't
be
know.
right.
Okay, but
Maybe
like,
right.
again, it has like a very low audience score, so audiences weren't like, "Wow, that's cool."
Yeah, that's
Like,
true.
I know that I read that much on like IMDb or something, but one more thing about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I do want to say, like, when I kind of was thinking about that more in that world they created, and that the idea of like a mythological South that just exists forever, right? It doesn't have a beginning or end or any really historical forces. It's just like there's corrupt governors one after the next, you know what I mean? And it's just sort of like its own little bubble in our brains and our collective consciousness. That, for the first time, allowed me to say, oh, maybe that's why they kind of transposed this like mythological story onto it. You know what I mean? I think that those sort of like, that's the connection there. Because I remember when we recorded that episode, I was like,
Yeah.
why? What's the point? But I think
Right.
maybe that was the point. And again, I don't know that it works as a story for me, but
Yeah.
again, watching something like this made me respect it all the more.
It's
Well,
funny.
and also
I mean,
sort of
yeah.
a nod to like the circularity of things too, right? Like we all kind of keep bringing up the whole circle notion, where just generally circle as an idea, but circle as the circularity of things keeping going on forever and ever without changing. Maybe
Exactly.
It's funny how little we talked about the communism in this movie, because it's just like, I do think that like it was them getting into it in a way that they haven't like fully gotten into it. It's just always been a sort of underground like subtext of their movie. But like,
True.
it was cool to see that part. I liked that part of it, but I also
too,
like,
actually.
yeah, those were actually some of my favorite scenes, was when George Clooney stopped being like, a fully dumb guy and became sort of a sponge in that moment, and was just like, the quieter scenes in those sort of library study or whatever, but even so, that would have been better as a segment to me of a fucking anthology. Like, I don't know.
But
Some
yeah,
of those actors were pretty funny too. Like, you know, a lot of like familiar faces. Speaking of Mulholland Drive, the guy from like my favorite scene in Mulholland Drive in there,
yeah.
the greatest jump scare of all time. You know, he pops out of the back, the weird looking guy. Anyway,
100%.
like that guy. Yeah, I don't even know his name.
the Winkies guy.
Yes,
Yeah.
Winkies.
I
Thank
hope
you.
I never
Thank
see
you.
that face in real life.
Perfect.
Yeah, those scenes were great. And again, it was just sort of like, you know, it's like, oh, history is going to happen. Like they're, you know what I mean? They're like introducing a movie star to like these ideas, and then it's just kind of slapped out of them. And then it's like, no, this kind of machine is going to keep perpetuating itself, again, within the bubble of this film, within this kind of like fictionalized kind of like golden era Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I don't know that that's like an interesting story.
It's
you know,
not.
they didn't make it compelling. Like Inside Llewyn Davis was such an interesting kind of character
Yeah, yeah.
piece, and this just doesn't have
It didn't work.
enough to like make it interesting.
You know, but it's also one of those things like we ended True Grit by being like, yeah, we didn't really need to talk about that movie for a podcast. And I kind of felt like that with this too, because I was just
Yes.
like, whereas True Grit, I was just like, I really liked that movie. I don't need to talk about it for an hour, but like I really liked it. This was just like, I didn't like it that much. I didn't like hate it, but I didn't like it that much. But I don't really need to like talk about it. So sorry, guys. Just kidding.
Listeners, we'll give you a full refund if you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, we'll have plenty to talk about next
It's fun
week
to talk
when we
about it
talk
anyway,
about the
yeah.
10-part anthology movie.
It's not 10 parts. And it
Long.
is very good. I like the Precious Scruggs a lot.
Too,
Yeah,
looking
well, it's our
forward to
last
seeing it
movie
again.
too. So yeah, like
Yeah, that's
prepare
it.
your final statements, and we'll have some pretty huge concluding thoughts, guys. So tune in next week.
Pretty
All
pumped.
right. Bye.
All right, see ya.
Thank you for listening to Autour Detour. We'll see you again next week.